Now, just before lunch, Vlad did a splendid job of explaining to you all what the word forensic means, so I don't have to do that. He also put up lots of very complicated graphs, and I'm not going to do that because it's after lunch and everyone's getting sleepy, and I'll be pleased if I only lose 10% of you, you know, as the blood rushes to places to digest your food. He also explained that we're independent, so I don't need to do that, and probably quite a few of you know that anyway. Now, Vlad's a forensic accountant, I'm a forensic scientist, and I hope and suspect that his job is as opaque to me as mine is to him, because that way I think lies a bit of job security. I'm going to start by just telling you a little bit about the firm I work for and the job that we do, so that this all comes in context. Hawkins is one of the larger forensic science companies in the UK. We were founded in 1980 by Dr. Roy Hawkins, who still works for us. He still wanders around the company looking pleased with himself and enjoying life. We have our head office on the Cambridge Science Park, and in our early days we did feed off that great university city. But we have offices in London, 6 others around the UK, and Dubai, Hong Kong and Singapore. So we do work internationally, and it's a fairly important part of our business. We've got over 80 scientists and engineers now. We try to take people who are academically excellent but also have a little bit of common sense. In other words, they've worked on the shop floor a bit. They know the tools of the trade, they know the tricks that people can pull. We are still managed by ourselves, and one of the joys of my life is that I have 3 ex-managing directors advising me whenever they feel so inclined. It's a double-edged sword. It keeps us very focused on the science and engineering business, but it does mean that we are run in that respect by an amateur, in this case me. We have a non-fee earning finance director who keeps me on the straight and narrow. We do fiercely maintain our independence, and I'm talking there of course about scientific independence. If you were to instruct us, then you are our client, and the normal sort of commercial rules apply. But the scientific opinion you'll get off us is independent. We do go for high quality, not pile them high and sell them cheap. It can be quite a dirty business, ours, and there are several people around there who make an extremely good living out of giving their clients what they want. That's not what we do. We do try to be approachable. So part of the reason for being here is to meet you all and to know the face on the other end of the phone. The list of what we do is quite tedious. We started off being known for fire investigation, but that's only about 40% of what we do now. The rest of it is various types of engineering, a lot of personal injury work, power and energy, a lot of material science and so on. What I'm going to do today is talk about what it's like doing this job in different countries around the world. Now, I confess, I'm not ashamed of it, I confess to being born, raised, educated and trained in the UK, and that has obviously given me a certain bias in my work. When I started working for Hawkins, I learned how to do our job in the UK. We don't tend to shove newcomers out onto the international market because it can be quite challenging, but as I got a bit more senior and a bit more experienced and I started doing jobs overseas, I found that my knowledge of how to do my job in the UK needed some very, very serious modification to work successfully in other countries. Sometimes the changes were minor. Working in Canada is very similar to working here. Working in the States is quite similar, if perhaps a little more aggressive. But as you go to other countries, the approach you need to take is really very, very different, and that's what I'm going to talk about. I'd like to sort of structure this around running through a case study in the UK of a major loss with you, and then a case study of a similar size in Kazakhstan. And as we go through, you will begin to see some of the differences, and I'll then go on in the second part to highlight some of the areas that we find are particularly interesting, challenging, difficult, call it what you will. They really all mean the same thing. The site I'm going to talk about first in the UK is this one. It was a very large warehouse storing highly combustible materials. And we got there, as is relatively common in this kind of thing, while it was still burning. Now that's quite good. Travel distances in the UK are quite small. It's easy to get anywhere. You can jump in your car and you can go. We have good relationships with both the fire service and the police. They tend to let us through their cordon. We can get up to the burning building. We can start on the critical business of interviewing witnesses at a very early stage, before they've really had time to think, while they're still a bit shocked, and while there's a decent chance that they'll tell you the truth. This was a classic case in which, by the time they had put the fire out, the building was so severely damaged that we really couldn't go into it. We couldn't even go that near to it, and we certainly had no idea from the patterns of fire damage where the fire had started. As it later turned out, we did find out where the fire started, but not from the patterns of fire damage. So that enables us to sit down with a lot of witnesses and take a great deal of time talking to them, so that we can then direct our investigation. Now, ultimately, the site looked like that, and it's the sort of scene which you drive up to and you think, nah, no, I'll do my bit, you know, I'll make all the right noises, but we're not going to get anything out of this. But we were blessed with a lot of very, very good witness evidence about this, a really good cooperative relationship with the fire service, who helped us throughout, both in interviewing people and in local knowledge. And in the end, we did get something out of this scene. To begin with, we collated all the witness evidence, and we found that most people could tell us roughly where this fire started, certainly in a quarter of the building. But all of them commented that by the time they saw it, it was really well developed. And that's not going to help us much. But we knew which part of the building to look in. More interestingly, when we ask that question that we always do, have you had any recent problems with the electrical system? Have you had any work done recently? We started to get some quite interesting answers. Yes, they were coming to the end of a period of routine testing and certification. And yes, there had been some rather peculiar goings-on in the last month. Strange things that didn't make a great deal of sense to begin with. Alarms started going off in a curious way. Lights were one day quite bright and the next day they were a bit dim. Machinery was starting up on its own. Machinery was running badly when it was going. And none of which appeared to make a great deal of sense, except that all of those symptoms are a symptom of voltage fluctuations. And anyone who deals particularly with 12-volt systems in cars and perhaps boats and caravans will be aware that if you get a poor connection on your battery, there's really no predicting what everything's going to do. All seem to fit with fluctuating voltages. It then came to our attention that all this testing they'd been doing. So we went back through the immaculately kept records of the testing and found that yes, indeed, they had been testing all the circuits. And by poring over all the wiring diagrams from this plant, we eventually managed to identify that it was this distribution board mounted on a pylon towards the middle of the building that seemed to be the focal point of all these various points. It was clearly of interest, and so we managed, rather than searching the whole building, to head directly for this panel. Now, the symptoms that I've been describing with low voltage are very typical of a phenomenon called a lost neutral on a three-phase electricity system. The three-phase system requires a good neutral to keep all the voltages at their required level. If you lose that neutral, they start wandering off all over the place. We'd been dealing with some testing that required the disconnection of the neutral supply, because the circuits all had to be isolated so that they could be tested for insulation integrity. And it's a common practice, and to do it, you go into the distribution board and you have what's known as a test piece. And it's this component here. And you're seeing it there in its normal working position. It's connecting the neutral and the earth into the main bus bar. When you want to test the system, you turn that through 90 degrees and you lock it. And then you can do your tests, and then you must obviously put it back again afterwards. We put forward, we speculated at this stage that whoever had done the testing on these circuits had not done that. So we drove a little pathway through all this debris into this distribution board, we got it out, and lo and behold, there is the component, here is the test piece, it should be pointing that way, and it had been left locked in to the test position. It explained all the symptoms, fluctuating voltages, and almost certainly why the fire started. Not proof, but certainly close enough, because of course if the voltage is going to go up markedly, then things don't like it and they tend to overheat and catch fire. Not proof positive, but as a result of having easy access, good records, good relationship with witnesses and so on, in the end we came to a reasonable conclusion in what was a very, very unpromising beginning. The fire service in the end took their results from us. We worked together throughout the whole thing. That became the official record. We were fortunate to work with somebody who was pragmatic. The fire service in the UK on the whole don't have strong electrical skills. They were very happy to be guided in their investigation and then ultimately in their conclusions. So we ended up with a happy position. Yes, sir?
How did the fire spread? Was the factory plant sprinkler protection, or?
It had sprinklers, but they weren't switched on. Yeah, yeah. with the knowledge of insurers, it was a decommissioned system, an ex-military facility actually that had been used for storing lavatory paper, as it turned out. So very flammable stuff.
How old is the building?
I don't know, but probably since Second World War era, pretty old, but refurbished, numerous times. Yeah. No compartmentation or anything like that. Nothing modern in there, certainly. Yeah. Oh, you were there, were you? Did you? Oh, no. How embarrassing.
Because you had to start talking about the adjusters. In fact, it was Gareth's case, wasn't it?
Stephen Bourne's, actually.
Well, I think Gareth originally.
Very possibly, yeah, very possibly. Well, that's knocked me off my perch. Anyone remember this?
Would that wiring have been original?
No. It was relatively modern, the wiring, as were the lights. Anyone recognise this?
Wait till we see what you say first.
Okay. An oil refinery in Kazakhstan, and let's compare and contrast. One fine day, witnesses in this plant became aware of a very loud bang. A huge vapor cloud of flammable material then started spreading out throughout the refinery, finally found itself in an ignition source and exploded. The fire then burnt for nearly 3 days while effectively the system emptied itself into the fire. Absolutely nothing the fire service could do. They just had to let the thing burn out. But the end result of that is that the area around the leak was fairly comprehensively trashed. Over a wide area, steel had softened, aluminium had melted, and there wasn't a great deal to go on. This is the area in which the fire had burned for nearly 3 days. And one of the first points you can see is that by the time I got there, it was a long time after the incident. They'd begun remedial works, and in fact the formal official investigation had been nearly completed. As always, we would try to start with witnesses. These really were not forthcoming. You can jump up and down and scream and shout as much as you like, but if somebody doesn't want to provide a witness for you, there is, when you're out on the ground, just maybe 2 of you, there really is very little you can do. When they were provided for us, we were given a local interpreter. No idea what they were saying or what they were translating. Witnesses, we were given their statements, and really that was it. We couldn't probe in any more detail as to what they'd seen. The kind of thing you would go for in a plant like this is to go to the monitoring records, because in many cases they will tell you the whole story. Buncefield is an interesting example of this, actually from our point of view, a really dull case. because everything was recorded, everything was written down and logged. Not so here. They did have a control room, obviously, but it was extremely old, analog, and there was no recording whatsoever. So we had no idea of pressures, temperatures, anything going on around the plant. So not much good for that. We always nowadays do ask for CCTV, and here we got a little bit luckier in what I think is one of the most interesting pieces. And plotting the direction and the speed of travel of the vapor cloud, we could backtrack, combine that with where the fire happened, and put the source of the leak and the site of the subsequent fire within this smaller of the two circles. The larger circle is the extent of the gas cloud. It was pretty much symmetrical because it was a still day. But we're looking at an area in here. Now that's about 100 meters in diameter. So it's a pretty big area. Arriving several weeks after the incident, wandering around in this slag heap of melted metal, quite challenging to find really where this leak had come from. Almost certainly where the leak had come from had melted and was no longer there. But the Kazakh authorities aren't keen on that, and so they came up with a conclusion. Most probable cause, depressurization of the connection inlet of liquid fraction from tower 5602 in the 500 millimeter diameter lower head, da-da-da-da-da-da. A fantastically precise conclusion for a site where there's really no evidence left. But this is, again, one of our biggest problems in being independent and trying to do a high-quality investigation, because really, if you don't have the evidence, you should be saying, I don't know. All I felt I could say was that the conclusion regarding the general site was okay, based on witness and CCTV evidence, but the exact site seemed to me to be pure speculation based on, or informed at least, by later analysis. In other words, they'll look for something wrong and then they'll blame that, which is not really the right way around to do it, but it's a very Soviet-era approach. There's no reason for me to stand up and disagree with that conclusion that they came to. I'm not going to say they're wrong. I'm just very, very puzzled as to why they chose it. This is the piece of kit they were trying to blame, in particular around on this side of it. And there used to be a flanged attachment to that, and that is what they were blaming for the cause of the fire. I hope you'll agree with me in looking at that it's puzzling as to how they can be quite so definite that it was a fitting that is no longer there that caused this fire. I personally was quite suspicious of that. It hadn't been in the fire, and quite often, surprisingly often, it is the case that as you fire out a great deal of flammable liquid, the flame front won't actually come back to the leak because it's moving too far. The fluid is coming out too fast. I was rather keen on that, but again, difficult when you're not allowed to touch it because of the authorities. Difficult to come to any firm conclusions. One of the reasons I think they went for this was that they discovered that the heat exchanger they were blaming just before the fire had been inspected by the authorities and given a further 7 years life, which clearly was a mistake. They found lots of things wrong with the way this heat exchanger had been treated. Certain critical strength calculations were not in the file. The heat exchanger had undergone really excessive conditions, mainly because the plant manager had been told to get more production. And the only way he could do that was by increasing temperature and pressure in this particular heat exchanger, taking it outside its operating parameters. He was running it with far too much liquid in it. And perhaps there were some structural problems with the original alloy, or perhaps it was just too old and material had been migrating around within the metal. I decided on the basis of my own investigation that while I could say the general area, I couldn't be specific about the exact position. I felt that the decision reached, which was adopted, I believe, was a pragmatic decision. A decision had to be reached. It's not okay to say unknown in most parts of the world. A decision had to be reached. I couldn't disagree with it, but if you wanted to put it in a British court with me on the other side, I would have no problems in proving why the case had not been made. a process which is not found in many parts of the world, but tried in the UK and it really wouldn't work. If the heat exchanger did fail, then the cause could be one of many factors, making, again in a UK court, subrogation extremely hard, because the original equipment manufacturer would blame the operator, and so on, and you go around in a small circle. And that sort of, in a way, sums up what I'm now going to run through with some specific points about what the difference is between working in our nice, cosy and safe world in the UK and working overseas. We are extremely spoilt here, and to an extent in other first world countries, because we have all sorts of systems in place that make our job not only quite straightforward in a broad sense, but also doable. We can behave in the way I described at the beginning, with high quality investigation and being independent. I think the first problem that we hit upon always now is safety. And this has got worse and worse and worse really very quickly, the safety of the people we send overseas. Terrorism and kidnapping are now rife in many, many parts of the world, and we have to take notice of that. Before we go anywhere, we do have to go through a process rightly insisted on by our insurers. You can try the Foreign Office website, but actually, if you tried using the Foreign Office website, you'd never go anywhere. We need something a bit more sophisticated than that, because it's also not particularly detailed. It doesn't tell you about the circumstances. So, like many other companies doing our work, we do use a security consultant, and we need their stamp of approval before we can go anywhere in terms of our insurers. They will assess the risk in the exact location you want to go in, and they will provide you with the security to go. And when they've done that, personally, I feel safer than if I was doing a loss in, I don't know, in downtown Paris or something like that. Paris is a very, very high risk at the moment. But if you go there with full security, armoured cars, police escorts and whatnot, you're really very safe. And so, you know, we're happy to go and do it. But there are times when you don't get that, those sort of in-between areas that are quite uncomfortable. And of course, one of the biggest safety problems we have is driving. Standing orders: never take a taxi in Saudi Arabia, for example. Lots of parts in the world where we do not let our people take taxis. We rely on being picked up by the local adjuster. And this is a theme I'm going to come back to before. For us to work overseas, it is a partnership with an experienced local adjuster who not only knows his adjusting, but knows the local terrain, the customs and the habits. So yeah, even in areas like Saudi Arabia, where terrorism is, well, I should say used to be unheard of, it is unfortunately getting in there as it is in the UAE, you don't take a taxi. Along with safety goes health. This is fairly straightforward. It's well documented as to what diseases you're going to get. We just have to make sure that everybody's up to date with their inoculations. Put the two together, health and safety, in that phrase we know and love, and you get a whole nest of problems. Again, in the UK, I know health and safety gets the piss taken out of it, but actually I think we've got it about right at the moment. We can do our work, but not too many people get hurt or even killed. Many parts of the world, you will enter an environment that is incredibly hazardous. There is no concept of the value of human life or health, and some of the practices followed are really, really scary, but you're supposed to work with them. And one of our biggest problems is to be working with a local investigator who has no concept of the dangers of fire-damaged buildings or partially collapsed machinery, and will want to go in and do their job. And you stand there and you say, no way am I going in there. That's difficult sometimes to explain to a client, because they want their investigation done. Well, this guy's gone in. What's wrong with you, you big wuss? And it's a real problem. It's the same with safety, as I mentioned earlier. We quite often come into conflict with clients who say, well, my adjuster's been going there for 4 years and he doesn't think it's dangerous. Well, sorry, but actually we do. An area of quite a lot of tension before you get going. And health and safety is a big thing, because, you know, attitudes may change around the world. The dangers are just as alive. Let's move on to something lighter now, and that's bureaucracy. very little of it here, really. People, again, sort of seem to think the UK, oh yes, lots of problems. There really, really isn't. You know, to get in here from another country, the visa system's quite streamlined. Again, you want to go to many parts of the world, you're not going to get there for about 2 months. By the time you've gone through the whole system, had the form sent back to you twice because you've done something wrong, you need help with that. You need help, once again, from the local agent, the local adjuster, or better still, from one of these agencies that specialises in getting you your visas. Getting in, though, is just the beginning. Once you're in, you hit, in many countries, the next layer of bureaucracy, that layer of bureaucracy. I'm not going to let you do your job unless you're nice to me kind of layer of bureaucracy. Sometimes it is for money. In other parts of the world, the Soviet Union is not noted for that, or wasn't. It's coming in now. But they just want the right bit of paper. And if you don't have it, you can go all the way out there and not actually get into sight. A real problem. We need help of the local. We need the person who knows how to smooth its way through. One of our problems is we do a very specialist job. There aren't that many of us around, you know, even the world that do it in a global sense. But we have to work in every country. We can't know all of this for every country. There are some countries where I'd feel happy going on my own, but they're very, very few. Because the next one will pop up. Someone wants you to go to Nigeria. You've no idea, other than the fact that it's hideously dangerous, you've no idea about how to get in or what to do. Not to be sniffed at is the climate, problems with the climate. And this ranges in both directions. If you're going to work in Finland or northern Norway in the winter, then you're not only going to need special kit, you're going to need somewhere inside your trousers to keep your camera batteries, and you're going to need some help because the whole place will be covered in snow and ice. And there's nothing more frustrating than seeing the bit you want to examine down there under 4 feet of ice, because there's really nothing you can do except wait and come back in the spring. You just can't do the job effectively under snow. Working days will be short. They're short partly from the daylight, but also because of the climatic conditions. You can't write because the gloves are too heavy. The dictaphone won't work because when you try to pick it up, the batteries are dead or the plastic will shatter. Going to the other extreme, working at 50 degrees plus heat in the Middle East or anywhere else, again, it has to be short days. You've got to have breaks for your water. You've got to have breaks to cool off. You can't write because sweat just gets everywhere. You need a waterproof notepad. I don't particularly want to say much about the next one on my list, which is language. Some of us speak more than one language, but none of us speak every language you need. Again, you need the local. You need an interpreter who is impartial and who you can trust. Ideally, once again, the local adjuster, because otherwise, you know, questions will be possibly innocently will be skewed. They'll pick the best word they can think of to interpret your question, and everyone will be met with blank stares, and you'll go wandering off down a hideous dead end because of some nuance that's not been correctly interpreted. Then we come on, after language, we come on to culture. And this is really one of the biggest because it operates at absolutely every level. I've been keeping an eye on this, knowing that I was doing this event today, what's been going on recently in the world. And we've got a group of Australians who have been deported for wearing Myanmar's flag on their buttocks, on their Speedos. We've had a chap who's been put in prison because he unplugged a speaker, which was relaying a Buddhist religious ceremony. Every now and again someone pops up in prison because they've been daft enough to have sex on a Saudi Arabian beach. Things like that we wouldn't do. You can go on training for this stuff, but actually I've always found it really, really unhelpful because whoever does this training for you is always out of date. And you rush off to your chosen country full of excitement about how you're going to behave, and they look at you as if you're mad. They say, well, we haven't done that for about 40 years. What are you doing? You've got to have the local who's going to say to you, don't go there. I got into the wrong compartment on a train in the UAE, and I didn't notice until I realised that everybody was shrinking away from me and looking at me as if I was some kind of mass murderer. And I'd got on the women and children coach. And that was the UAE, so I was okay. I mean, I didn't hang around, don't get me wrong, I got out at the next stop. But you do that in some places, and they really will, you know, because they don't like us, actually, in a lot of places. They really don't. And if you give them an excuse, they will put you in prison at the drop of a hat. There's a terrifyingly long list of businessmen who have been imprisoned in the UAE, which is meant to be, the place that is as Western it comes. So put a foot wrong and you are going to be in trouble. You need your local person to help you out. But of course, culture is not just about the wider thing. There's the culture of insurance. Now, I'm really familiar with the way it operates in the UK. I'd feel comfortable, I think, in any meeting that I've had, maybe Jonathan Clark's stuff, notwithstanding, but I'd feel pretty comfortable in any meeting. It's not the same anywhere else because there's a different culture in almost every country. The interplay between the broker, the adjuster, the insurer, and the insured is subtly different, sometimes not at all subtly different. And by behaving in the same way in each country, you can do a lot of damage to your client, the insurer. If you go wading in and take too tough a line or too soft a line. If you try doing anything in Russia without shouting, no one will respect you in the slightest. Try that approach in other places and it really won't work. So again, my common theme throughout all of this, if you're going to use our services, it has to be in the company of a local adjuster or agent. Perhaps one of the more interesting things is access to the fire service, to the fire brigade. Now we have a fantastic relationship here with the fire brigade. It's under a bit of strain at the moment because of all the money that's being sucked out of them, but we work very well with them. They are first-class witnesses in the early stages of a fire. They do their early investigation, which is what we want nailed down, the primary witness evidence, the primary fire damage evidence, and they work with us and they give us that evidence, and we don't really usually talk much to the police. We're really unusual in that. It happens hardly anywhere else. In most countries in the world, fire investigation is done by either the police or the army. And they're never at the scene at the beginning. So that's all right, you would say, because those investigators from the police or the army will get their evidence from the fire brigade. They don't. They view the fire service as monkeys, as complete second-class citizens. They wouldn't dream of asking the opinion of a fireman as where the fire was first seen. And that evidence just never enters the investigation. It's never secured. If we want to speak to the fireman, I've never known it happen. You say, I want to speak to them. They think you're a fool. Why would you speak to them? What do they? You go right down in their estimation. So you can ask some people, but ask the police Lord High Admiral or whatever title he's got, if you can speak to the fire service, and you'll get nothing else from them because they'll just treat you like an idiot from then on. A really, really odd quirk of how people have set up their bureaucracies. And it leads on, of course, to the problem perhaps that I highlighted in the Kazakhstan refinery, and that is the status of the official investigation. And it's really important to know this, and it's really important that insurers know this. In the UK, if we come up with a conclusion that is not the same as the fire brigades, and we do this regularly, then we can argue the point. We can debate it with them. We can even go and interview them. And we can say, well, why do you think this? Why did you think that? We can get them to change their mind, sometimes reissue a report based on new evidence. In any event, courts are just about open to having that official record challenged. But they're surprisingly not open to having that happen in this country. Once the man with the shiny buttons and the smart uniform stands up in court, what their report says will nearly always have more weight behind it than mine will. If you go elsewhere, the official report is the official report, and you are not going to get it changed however hard you try, and there's almost no point in trying. So what we are left doing very often is what I did in this Kazakhstan refinery, is saying to my clients, look, here's the position, they've said this, there really isn't any evidence, or they've said this and it's wrong, but you can't go back and challenge it. You cannot have an unknown over most of the world. And I've heard this figure quoted, I think it came from the States, where somebody was saying that their particular organisation found the cause of a fire in 95% of all cases. Now, I'm sorry, but that is nonsense. I suppose it depends on how you define find the cause. Did we find the cause of the Kazakhstan fire? Well, yeah, there was a big leak. But that's not what this person was saying, and it's in a published paper. He was saying that they nail it absolutely spot on 95% of the time. You don't do that. You cannot do that with fires. But you get this official story, and you are stuck with it. can't go on from this without having a little bit of a word about corruption. It's very variable all over the world. Comes in lots of different shapes and sizes. It's as blatant as the man on the immigration desk asking you for money before he lets you in. It's sometimes much more subtle. It can be favours. It doesn't have to be money. Our position is we don't play with it, but again we're led by the local agent. I go to some really corrupt places, and I'm quite surprised by the attitude of the Europeans or the Americans who are working there. They don't want you, if they live there, they really don't want you paying anyone bribes, because it just makes it worse for them to try and change things. But it's never far below the surface. And of course, if I can just finish with the politics. And again, like culture, you can look at this on almost every level. It's the politics of the country of which you have to be very aware. I've never done a fire in North Korea, but if I did, I suspect it would be an interesting one. But you'll get local national politics playing a part. They play a part because they don't want you there. They'll play a part because they do want you there. Sometimes they welcome you. India still, on the whole, love us. You know, and you'll have a good time in India. There's a different level of political intrigue and corruption, but of course there's the politics of the case as well. And this is where we walk into a new situation nearly every single time, and we are babes in arms, and we depend on being guided and being told when to open our mouths and when to stay silent by the local adjuster who is absolutely critical in all of this. So the laws of physics don't change. We ought to be able to just set down wherever we want in the world and do our work according to the same rules. Voltages change a bit here and there. Appliances work in a different way, but basically it is all the same. And yet it is so utterly different because of what we are allowed to do, what we can do, and in the end what we do. And it nearly always ends up, in a lot of the world, ends up as a pragmatic solution, pragmatic advice to insurers. Here's what we actually think happened, but this is what you're stuck with. So you know, there you go. What we think are facts, and what are the facts you're going to have to play with. You're going to have to reach your decision on. I think that's it, really. I just say one last time, to use our services effectively, if you're ever considering it, we've got to have the local knowledge provided to us for all of the reasons that I've been over. Thank you very much.